What if I told you that the most dangerous person in America isn't the ruthless CEO, the manipulative politician, or even the textbook narcissist? It's the fed-up empath who just discovered their true power. Carl Jung, the legendary Swiss psychiatrist, uncovered a psychological phenomenon so explosive that it's been quietly revolutionizing lives across the nation. We're talking about empaths, those ultra-sensitive souls who feel everything, absorb everyone's pain, and have been told their whole lives there too much. But here's the plot twist that's about to change everything. When these gentle giants finally hit their breaking point, they don't break, they transform into something far more formidable than their abusers ever imagined. This isn't about revenge or becoming cruel. This is about conscious empaths becoming absolutely untouchable by manipulation. In boardrooms from Silicon Valley to Wall Street, in families from Beverly Hills to small-town America, awakened empaths are quietly dismantling toxic power structures simply by refusing to play the game. They're not fighting fire with fire. They're transcending the entire battlefield. If you've ever been called too sensitive but felt there was hidden strength in that sensitivity, buckle up. You're about to discover why narcissists are secretly terrified of what you're becoming. The psychological alchemy that terrifies manipulators. Jung called it the most shocking transformation he'd ever witnessed in decades of clinical practice. Picture this: Sarah, a marketing executive from Chicago, spent 3 years absorbing her boss's rage, accepting blame for his mistakes, and believing his gaslighting was constructive feedback. She was the classic empath, always apologizing, always explaining, always trying to prove her worth to someone whose opinion was worthless. Then something clicked. Sarah discovered Jung's concept of shadow integration, and everything changed overnight. Here's what Jung realized that modern psychology still refuses to acknowledge. The empath's gentleness was never weakness, it was strength in disguise, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Think about America's cultural obsession with toughness. We worship the alpha, the aggressive go-getter, the person who doesn't take crap from anyone. But Jung discovered something that flips this entire narrative on its head. The most dangerous person in any room isn't the loudest, meanest, or most aggressive. It's the quiet empath who just figured out how to weaponize that sensitivity. This transformation doesn't happen gradually with soft music and meditation retreats. It's what Jung called enantiodromia, the principle that everything eventually turns into its opposite. The endless giver becomes the conscious chooser. The perpetual people-pleaser becomes the strategic bound. The walking trauma repository becomes the manipulation detector that no amount of charm can fool. Modern neuroscience backs up Jung's intuition. Dr. Judith Orloff's research shows empaths have hyperactive mirror neurons and heightened activity in emotional processing centers. But here's what Jung realized decades before brain scans existed. This same neural wiring that makes empaths vulnerable also makes them incredibly powerful when they learn to direct it consciously. It's like discovering you've been carrying a Ferrari engine while driving in first gear your entire life. The most dangerous part isn't the empath's newfound awareness. It's what happens when they integrate their shadow. All that repressed anger, those suppressed boundaries, that denied self-protection they've been taught to fear. Jung observed that empaths don't just carry their own emotional baggage. They become unconscious containers for everyone else's shadow material. The rage their parents couldn't express, the grief their friends couldn't process, the manipulation their partners couldn't acknowledge. But when empaths finally reach their limit, they don't just release this accumulated poison, they alchemize it. They transform years of absorbed toxicity into what Jung called psychological gold. This is the transcendent function in action. The ability to transform opposite forces into something entirely new and more powerful than either original component. Here's how this transformation actually unfolds, and why it's absolutely terrifying for anyone who's been feeding off empathic dysfunction. Stage 1 is recognition, the lifting of the veil. The empath suddenly sees the pattern with crystal clarity. All those times they absorbed blame that wasn't theirs, apologized for others, bad behavior, believed that love meant endless giving while receiving crumbs. It's like watching the matrix code reveal itself. Stage 2 is integration. The empath doesn't reject their sensitivity, they weaponize it. They use their hyperperceptive abilities not to absorb and please, but to see through manipulation before it begins. Jung observed that integrated empaths become psychological seers, reading people's unconscious motivations with surgical precision. They can feel the narcissist's emotional state beneath their performance, sense manipulation before it's fully formed, detect lies through micro-expressions that others miss completely. Stage 3 is sovereignty. The empath stops seeking external validation and becomes what Jung called individuated, psychologically whole and self-directed. They no longer need others to complete them because they've completed themselves through conscious shadow work. This creates what I call the empathic paradox. The more an empath integrates their shadow, the more compassionate they become. But their compassion is no longer naive. It's fierce, discerning, and absolutely terrifying to those who depend on empathic dysfunction to feel powerful. They become dangerous, not because they attack, but because they simply stop participating. In toxic dynamics, without the empath's unconscious cooperation, the entire manipulative system collapses like a house of cards. The awakened empath doesn't fight the narcissist, they make them irrelevant. Chapter 2. The 3 Empathic Levels and America's Hidden Epidemic. 670 words. Jung identified something that explains why America is quietly experiencing what I call the Great Empathic Awakening. From corporate boardrooms to suburban kitchens, millions of sensitive souls are discovering they've been operating at the most vulnerable level of empathic development, and it's costing them everything. Level 1. The unconscious empath. This describes roughly 70% of sensitive Americans. Think of Jennifer from Portland, a nurse who comes home emotionally destroyed every day. Not just from her patient's pain, but from absorbing her colleagues' stress, her supervisor's frustration, and even her family's problems. She feels everything, but understands nothing. She's like a sponge that soaks up whatever it encounters, with no filter, no protection, no conscious choice. These empaths believe the cultural lie that sensitivity equals weakness. They've internalized America's tough-it-out mentality so deeply that they see their empathy as something to manage or overcome rather than a superpower to harness. They attract energy vampires like moths to a flame because they haven't learned Jung's most crucial lesson. Psychological boundaries aren't walls that keep love out. They're gates that let love in consciously. Level 2. The Awakening. This is where the transformation begins, and it's happening nationwide. These are the empaths who started questioning why they always felt drained after family gatherings, why certain colleagues could trigger them with a single comment, why their romantic relationships followed the same exhausting patterns. Maybe they stumbled across Jung's work on projection, discovered the concept of narcissistic abuse, or simply had one toxic relationship to many. Mark, a software engineer from Austin, represents this level perfectly. After his divorce from a woman who used his empathy against him for 8 years, he started recognizing the patterns. He began to see how his ex-wife projected her own shame onto him, how she used his compassion as a weapon, how she trained him to walk on eggshells around her emotional instability. But awareness alone isn't transformation, it's just the beginning. Level 3. The Sovereign Empath. This is Jung's vision of empathic mastery, and it's what's making manipulators across America absolutely panic. These empaths have completed what Jung called individuation. They've done the shadow work, integrated their suppressed anger and boundaries, and learned to use their sensitivity as a precision instrument rather than a liability. Lisa from Denver embodies this level. After years of being the family scapegoat, absorbing everyone's dysfunction and blame, she learned to feel deeply without being overwhelmed. When her narcissistic mother calls now, Lisa can sense the manipulation attempt before it's fully formed. She feels compassion for her mother's pain without taking responsibility for it. She can love her family without losing herself in their drama. What makes sovereign empaths truly dangerous is their psychological immunity. They've developed what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposites in creative tension. They're simultaneously open and boundaried, loving and self-protective, compassionate and discerning. This integration creates a person who cannot be manipulated because they've learned to trust their inner guidance system completely. Here's what's happening across America right now. Millions of empaths are making the leap from level 2 to level 3, and it's creating a seismic shift in power dynamics everywhere. In corporations, empathic employees are no longer accepting toxic work cultures. They're either transforming their workplaces or leaving for companies that value psychological health. In families, empathic members are refusing to carry everyone Elsa's emotional burdens. They're setting boundaries that force entire family systems to evolve or lose access to their empathic energy. In relationships, empaths are walking away from partnerships that require them to dim their light for others' comfort. They're seeking conscious connections with people who can match their depth and authenticity. This shift is so profound that it's actually changing dating culture. Apps like Hinge are adding prompts about emotional intelligence because awakened empaths refuse to settle for surface-level connections. Jung predicted this collective awakening. He wrote about a time when enough individuals would achieve psychological wholeness to impact the entire human collective. We're witnessing that time right now. The American empath is no longer content to be the emotional janitor for unconscious people. They're becoming conscious creators of healthy relationship dynamics. And that's revolutionizing everything from workplace culture to family systems to romantic partnerships. The question isn't whether you're an empath. The question is what level you're operating from. Chapter 3. The Empathic Revolution in American Workplaces. 670 words. Something unprecedented is happening in American workplaces, and HR departments from coast to coast are scrambling to understand it. The Great Resignation wasn't just about better pay or remote work. It was largely driven by awakened empaths who finally said enough to toxic corporate cultures that had been feeding off their emotional labor for decades. Jung's principles are quietly revolutionizing how empaths navigate professional environments. Take David, a project manager from Atlanta, who spent 5 years being the emotional sponge for his team. Every deadline crisis became his personal emergency. Every client complaint felt like a personal attack. Every team conflict somehow became his responsibility to resolve. He was pulling 70-hour weeks, not because the workload demanded it, but because he was unconsciously managing everyone else's stress and dysfunction. The turning point came when David discovered Jung's concept of psychological projections. He realized his boss was projecting his own incompetence onto the team. His colleagues were dumping their overwhelm onto him, and he was accepting it all as his natural role. But Jung's shadow work taught David something revolutionary. He didn't have to carry what wasn't his. Here's how the transformation unfolded, and why it's spreading like wildfire through corporate America. David stopped absorbing his team's panic during crises. Instead of taking on their emotional state, he remained calm and solution-focused. He stopped over-explaining his decisions to people who weren't interested in understanding. He stopped apologizing for setting realistic timelines and boundaries. The result: David's team actually became more competent. Without him absorbing their dysfunction, they were forced to develop their own emotional regulation and problem-solving skills. His boss's incompetence became visible to upper management because David wasn't covering for it anymore. Within 6 months, David got promoted while his toxic boss was quietly moved to a different department. This pattern is repeating itself across industries. Empathic nurses are refusing to work in hospitals that treat them as disposable. Empathic teachers are leaving schools that expect them to be therapists, parents, and security guards on top of educators. Empathic customer service representatives are demanding companies that don't expect them to absorb abuse from customers and management alike. The most powerful example I've witnessed involves Maria, a marketing director from Seattle. She worked for a startup where the CEO had classic narcissistic traits. He took credit for successes, blamed others for failures, and created a culture of fear and competition among employees. Maria had been his psychological shock absorber for 3 years, managing his moods, cleaning up his messes, and protecting her team from his volatility. But when Maria applied Jung's individuation process, everything changed. She stopped managing the CEO's emotions and started managing her own responses. She documented his behavior patterns instead of making excuses for them. She refused to participate in his drama while maintaining professional excellence in her actual job responsibilities. The CEO's mask began slipping without Maria's unconscious support. Other employees started noticing his behavior because Maria wasn't absorbing the tension he created anymore. Investors began questioning his leadership because Maria stopped covering for his strategic mistakes. Within 8 months, he was removed by the board, and Maria was promoted to VP of Marketing. This is what Jung meant by psychological nonviolence. The awakened empath doesn't attack the toxic system, they simply withdraw their participation from it. Without empaths unconsciously propping up dysfunctional leadership, enabling incompetent colleagues, and absorbing organizational toxicity, these systems collapse under their own weight. American companies are beginning to recognize this shift. Progressive organizations are investing in emotional intelligence training, creating psychologically safe work environments, and promoting leaders who understand that empathic employees aren't weak, they're the emotional backbone of healthy teams. Companies like Google, Microsoft, and Johnson & Johnson are implementing Jung-inspired programs that help employees develop psychological boundaries and authentic leadership skills. But traditional old-school organizations that depend on empathic labor are struggling. They're experiencing high turnover, difficulty recruiting top talent, and toxic cultures that drive away their best people. The empathic revolution is forcing American business to evolve or become irrelevant. The sovereign empath in the workplace becomes what Jung called a cultural transformer, someone whose presence elevates everyone around them while maintaining their own psychological integrity. They're not trying to fix broken systems. They're creating new ones based on consciousness, authenticity, and mutual respect. The message is clear: adapt to conscious empathic standards, or lose access to the emotional intelligence that makes great teams possible. Chapter 4. Breaking the Family Trauma Cycle Through Empathic Sovereignty, 670 words. The most profound battleground for empathic awakening isn't in boardrooms or dating apps. It's around American dinner tables, where generational patterns of dysfunction have been passed down like toxic heirlooms. Jung understood that families are psychological ecosystems, and when the empathic member awakens, the entire system is forced to evolve or collapse. Meet Rachel from Phoenix, the classic family scapegoat, who spent 28 years being the emotional regulator for her dysfunctional clan. Her narcissistic father raged, her codependent mother enabled, her golden child brother could do no wrong, and Rachel absorbed all the family's unexpressed shame, anger, and dysfunction. Every holiday was an emotional marathon where she managed everyone's feelings while her own needs went completely ignored. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving 2023. Rachel's father launched into his usual tirade about politics. Her mother started her passive-aggressive comments about Rachel's life choices, and her brother made his typical cutting remarks disguised as jokes. But instead of absorbing the toxicity like she had for nearly 3 decades, Rachel did something revolutionary. She applied Jung's principle of conscious non-participation. She didn't argue, didn't defend, didn't try to fix anyone's mood. She simply stopped absorbing their projections. When her father tried to bait her into a political argument, she responded with calm neutrality. "That's an interesting perspective, Dad." When her mother criticized her career, she replied without defensiveness, "I'm happy with my choices, Mum." When her brother made a cutting remark, she didn't laugh or deflect. She just looked at him with clear, unbothered eyes. The family dynamic imploded within hours. Without Rachel's unconscious participation, the system couldn't maintain its toxic equilibrium. Her father's rage had nowhere to land, so he had to sit with his own discomfort. Her mother's manipulation lost its target, forcing her to face her own anxiety. Her brother's superior attitude became obviously mean-spirited, without Rachel's complicity. This is what Jung called the shadow projection crisis, when family members can no longer use the empath as a dumping ground for their disowned emotions. They're forced to confront their own psychological reality. Some family members rise to the challenge and begin their own consciousness work. Others escalate their manipulation attempts, becoming more aggressive, or trying to recruit other family members as flying monkeys to bring the empath back into line. Rachel's family chose escalation initially. They accused her of being cold, selfish, and thinking she's better than everyone. They tried guilt trips about family loyalty and threatened to cut her off financially and emotionally. But Jung had prepared Rachel for this reaction through his teachings about individuation. The process of becoming psychologically whole requires separating from unconscious family patterns. Even when that separation triggers massive resistance, here's what makes empathic family awakening so powerful. It's not just personal healing, it's generational curse breaking. Jung understood that psychological patterns pass through family lines like DNA. The empathic family member who does their shadow work doesn't just heal themselves. They interrupt the transmission of trauma to future generations. Rachel's transformation had ripple effects she never expected. Her teenage niece, who had been showing early signs of empathic overfunction, began setting her own boundaries instead of absorbing family dysfunction. Rachel's aunt, who had been the family empath before Rachel took over the role, felt permission to start saying no to family obligations that drained her. Even Rachel's brother eventually approached her to understand what had changed and how he could work on his own emotional patterns. The sovereign empath in the family system becomes what Jung called a differentiated self, someone who can love their family without losing themselves in family dynamics. They can feel compassion for family members' pain without taking responsibility for healing it. They can participate in family events without absorbing family toxicity. This transformation is happening in families across America right now. Empathic daughters are refusing to be their mother's therapists. Empathic sons are declining to be their father's emotional regulators. Empathic siblings are stepping out of family scapegoat roles and forcing their families to distribute emotional labor more fairly. The message to American families is clear: evolve your emotional patterns or lose access to the empathic family member who has been holding your dysfunction together. The days of unconscious emotional vampirism, disguised as family love, are ending. Jung's vision of individuated families, where each member is psychologically whole and relationships are based on conscious choice rather than unconscious need, is becoming reality, one awakened empath at a time. Chapter 5: The Future of Conscious Relationships and America's Empathic Evolution, 670 words. We're witnessing the emergence of what Jung envisioned as the ultimate stage of human psychological evolution: relationships between individuated, conscious beings who choose each other from wholeness rather than need. American empaths are leading this revolution, and it's fundamentally transforming how we love, connect, and build life partnerships. The old model of relationships, built on unconscious patterns and emotional vampirism, is dying. The new model, emerging from Jung's principles of conscious connection, is being born, and awakened empaths are the architects of this transformation. Consider Tom from Denver, a divorced empath who spent 10 years in a marriage where his sensitivity was used against him daily. His ex-wife would have emotional meltdowns that he'd spend hours trying to fix. She'd criticize his empathy as weakness, while simultaneously demanding he absorb all her negative emotions. She'd threaten to leave whenever he tried to set boundaries, then love-bomb him back into compliance. Tom believed this was what love looked like: endless giving, constant emotional labor, and accepting crumbs while providing banquets. After his divorce and 2 years of Jung-inspired shadow work, Tom entered the dating scene as a completely different person. He could sense manipulation attempts in the first conversation. He could tell within minutes whether someone was seeking a partner or a therapist. He could feel the difference between genuine interest and love-bombing tactics. Most importantly, he refused to participate in unconscious relationship dynamics. Tom's first few dates after his awakening were revelatory. Women who would have triggered his savior complex before now felt draining and obvious. He found himself unimpressed by sob stories designed to elicit his empathic rescue response. He felt turned off by people who couldn't regulate their own emotions. He was no longer attracted to project partners who needed fixing. Instead, Tom found himself drawn to Sarah, a woman who had also done her own psychological work. She was empathic but boundaried, sensitive but strong, caring but not codependent. Their first conversation felt like meeting an equal, someone who could match his depth without drowning in it, someone who could love fully without losing herself. This is what Jung called conscious relationship to individuated people, choosing each other from personal wholeness rather than emptiness. It's the opposite of the traditional American dating model, where opposites attract and partners complete each other. Awakened empaths don't seek completion, they seek conscious collaboration. The dating landscape is transforming to accommodate this shift. Dating apps are evolving beyond superficial swiping to include emotional intelligence assessments, attachment style, compatibility, and even questions about shadow work and personal growth. Empaths are creating conscious dating communities where psychological health is the primary attraction factor. But the most profound change is how awakened empaths handle the inevitable challenges of conscious partnership. When Tom and Sarah have conflicts now, neither tries to fix or rescue the other. They don't absorb each other's emotions or take responsibility for each other's healing. They can be vulnerable without being victims, supportive without being codependent, loving without losing themselves. This creates what I call empathic immunity in love, the ability to remain open-hearted while psychologically protected. Tom can feel Sarah's pain without making it his mission to eliminate it. Sarah can support Tom's growth without taking responsibility for his happiness. They've learned Jung's most revolutionary relationship principle: you can love someone completely while allowing them to be completely responsible for themselves. American culture is slowly adapting to accommodate conscious, empathic relationships. Traditional relationship advice about compromise and putting your partner first is being replaced with guidance about maintaining individuality within partnership. Couples therapy is shifting from conflict resolution to consciousness expansion.